Hello and welcome to Humanising IT podcast. My name is Katrina Macdermid and I'm joined by Wesley Eugene, also known as Wes. Hello, Wes. How you going?
I'm doing well, Katrina. I'm excited about being here. I'm excited about this project we have, speaking about humanizing IT and what it means, all things human-centered design and ITSM. And I'm really excited about today's guest. Being able to have David Ratcliffe of Pink Elephant fame, and as many people may or may not know, but most should, one of the actual pioneers of IT service management, um, to speak about these topics is really awesome.
Exactly. And I am like you, Wes, beyond delighted to have David Ratcliffe, the president of Pink Elephant, as our first guest on this Humanising IT podcast. And today, with you and David, we'll be discussing three main topics. Invariably, we like to talk, so we may go off a little bit, but essentially, we'll be discussing why do things go wrong in IT service management. And this topic is based on my book, as you know, um, that human centered design for IT service management. And I wrote that because what I feel is what we're missing in IT service management is the human experience. And obviously, with your background, Wes, and your knowledge of human centered design and how you have applied that yourself within your IT departments, this is going to be an amazing first episode.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to it. So I guess without further ado, let's get David in the room.
Let's get David.
Well, for the billions of people who don't know me, which is virtually everyone, I'm co founder and president at Pink Elephant Inc., based in Toronto, Canada. But Pink Elephant is present almost everywhere in the world, especially in this virtual world we live in. And I've been involved in IT service management probably since about 1976. Whoa.
There's a lot more to say, David, which we'll go on. And Wesley, as we discussed in our intro, great for you to be here again on this first episode of the Humanising IT podcast, where we're going to discuss sections of my book called Humanising IT, Human Centered Design for IT Service Management. And what we're going to start off with, chapter 2, is why do things go wrong in IT service management? It's a bit of a topical subject. And as I was saying earlier, in a pre-recording, Dave and Wes, I'm a bit bitter and twisted in IT service management. I've been around a long time, not as long as you, Dave, but a long time. And I feel that we still are not delivering as what we could do. And I think there's many reasons for that and very complex reasons. But I'm going to start off with what we say in the book about how humanizing IT compares IT service management to the Model T Ford and the production line. And Dave, if I may just read a section of the book to our listeners. IT service management is often seen as a one size fits all approach with little customization. Or, in the words of Henry Ford, referring to the mass production of Model T Fords. A totally utilitarian approach with no customization, not even for the paint color. This resulted in maximizing production output by creating certainty on exactly what was needed in each step of the process of manufacture. Incredible efficiencies resulted, utilizing known and consistent processes. It reduced the training time for men on the line, ensuring all tooling was utilized to the maximum and churned out thousands of vehicles of the same model. So, what's the connection between IT service management and the Ford model? Isn't this type of efficiency what we strive for in IT service management? Known and consistent processes, everyone knowing their role, and tooling maximized. Dave, you are a pioneer of IT service management, and I know that you, as well as being a pioneer, really helped shape and actually write what we know as IT service management today. And I am perhaps being somewhat critical in my view of what IT service management is, but do you agree with what Humanising IT is saying, is that it's systematic, you design it to be cost effective, standardized?
Well, with the benefit of 2020 hindsight, 30 years later, job well done. But at the time, we didn't have anything. It was the Wild West. And when you talk about one size fits all, I will address this on two levels. Because in the wider world, we're talking about different organizations using the same reference material. So is it one size fits all for Jetstar and one size fits all for the Australian Taxation Office, right? That's one level of, or one way of positioning this as does one size fits all work. And when anyone's critical of the fact that it doesn't work for us, we remind them of, yeah, but ITIL has said from the very beginning in the ITIL version of ITSM that you've got to be prepared to adapt, right? You've got to be prepared to read behind what's in front of you and see what the potential is. So it doesn't have to be one size fits all. I guess what you're mostly thinking about, though, when you say one size fits all, is the different users of IT within an organization all be presented with the same level of service. We used to talk about in the original course that was developed for ITIL in 92, the IT service manager course. We used to do exercises and role playing of negotiations as part of service level management. So we try to address the, getting away from the one size fits all by saying what needs to be different for this user group compared to that user group. But mea culpa, overall, when you look at the IT service management model, we all know we've worked with for so many years. It is really presenting a very consistent approach for everyone. But the what we have to remember is it's adaptable, and that's the reason some of us are still in business, because otherwise you just deliver a set of books and say get on with it. So the consultant world makes a living out of helping people to adapt to what the books described.
Yeah, but I also have issue with when that is a mandate to adapt or evolve, because I feel that you're giving instructions to people that aren't qualified to adapt or evolve. I was talking to Wes earlier, which we'll discuss, is that IT service management is complex, very, very complex. And I think we forget that. And I think that the people in, and I'm one of them, I worked in IT all my life, as you know, Dave, excuse me, in quite senior roles. And I look back in hindsight, and I did not a great job in hindsight. I really didn't, because I feel that I didn't appreciate the complexity of what was involved in IT service management.
If you let me address that for a second, because this is a good point you've raised, is when we talked about IT service management 30 years ago, or in 1992 when the first courses were introduced, we were talking about the process model, processes. When we talk about IT service management today, we're talking about people, processes, technology, partners, a whole ecosystem around processes. In fact, we even, in the pink elephant world right now, we talk about integrated IT service management, where we integrate with not just business needs and the business dialogue, but also the enabling practices which help IT service management, like organizational change and the things you talk about, Katrina. So IT service management as a short term has evolved in its definition. And certainly going back to the early days, it was all just about process. And we didn't really understand how important it was to educate people to work with process and to work with each other and to understand we're all in this for the business need, for what the business needs from us. And that all became things we've learned along the way, which is why in the most widely used ITSM model, ITIL, there's now been 4 versions.
I mean, that's interesting, Dave, I didn't look at it from that perspective. That's why I love talking to you and doing these type of forums. Is this a fair statement that you were instrumental or pioneered writing processes?
Yeah, we just thought about the inputs and outputs and the metrics, right? We didn't think about, I mean, we did talk about roles. If you pick up any of the original books, they'll talk about roles, they'll talk about tools, but they were all afterthoughts. The main meat and potatoes was what's an input, what activity what do you do to add value, and what's the output, and what are the units of work, incidents, problems, changes, etc., configuration items. I mean, it was really all about process. Now, this is my opinion, Katrina. You get some other guys who were as deeply involved or more so, and there are a lot of them that were more involved than I was, and they'll probably give you a more nuanced interpretation of this. But the overriding question you're asking me today is about why do things go wrong in ITSM? And I explain this by saying, well, let's go back to where we started. I know the younger folks don't like to hear this stuff, but it helps to tell the story of how do we get to where we are today? Because once you tell people something and it sticks, it's really difficult to get them to understand that you want to change that a bit. And there's an evolution and there's something new. You've got to work twice as hard because what you said yesterday is not consistent with what you're saying today. And so a lot of that stuff, that dogma, which we now call dogma, still sticks. And people say, ITIL doesn't say that. ITIL says you must do it this way. Where does it ever say that in any of those books? It doesn't, because people have been brainwashed into thinking this is the way something has to be, and not thinking about what's different in their organization, what's different about the different people and users and customers that they're interacting with, what's different about the different suppliers that you're working with, and how do you get all of those people to collaborate and work well together. There's very little guidance in the ITSM books about that.
Absolutely. And then I think that IT service management has become confused over the decades because by you saying it was a process-driven framework, and then somewhere along this line, the word service and experience and everything has come into a mix. That was not what it was designed for. And that's, as I said, it's really interesting. And when you talk about these different roles that I believe from a human-centered point of view were not considered because, again, we had IT people, again, challenge me, writing this type of process, which brings me on to the next subject I want to talk about with Wes. I do retract somewhat from what I was saying when we say one size fits all, and you're right, Dave. What it means is that IT service management, it's a user. So when the user contacts a service, everyone's a user. That's what the book says. The user or end user, it's changed over the years, as you know. So Wes, as I said, I'll retract slightly. IT service management, I think it was IT service management, it could have been, did refer to a different type of user or a persona, we might say, as a VIP. So that we did think of different users and it was a VIP. So Wesley, as a former and the CIO of C-suite, you were treated as a VIP. Is that correct?
It depends on the day. For sure. Some days I receive VIP treatment, and some days I was just a regular commoner.
Well, that's right. Just one of us in the IT or the business. And as we've discussed, Wesley, I fundamentally disagree with this concept of VIP. And when we were discussing pre-recording, you mentioned, I'm sorry, I'm going to call you out, Wesley, um, that VIP is special people. Do you want to elaborate on why you're so special? And I'm not, but go on.
Well, I mean, I may take issue with the word special, um, and emphasize more that um, the VIP persona arguably was too general. Um, but even acknowledging that it was an attempt to address that there are different needs um, by different types of end users, as it were, in an organization. And the folks typically that fall into the category of a VIP are folks that are actually um, have a mandate to make the best decisions possible for an organization. There is such a thing called decision fatigue. Um, in fact, famously, our former U.S. President Barack Obama, um, in an interview, talked about the fact that he limited the number of the different types of suits he wore to like just two flavors, navy blue and black. He got into a lot of hot water when he went and wore a tan suit one day. But the reason he did this was to eliminate decision fatigue. That so that the majority of his time can be focused on addressing the most complex problems. So when you adapt that to thinking about a VIP in any organization, I would put forward that that is still their primary job in leading that organization. They're getting compensated for the value of their decisions, and they need to have less friction. It is to the organization's benefit that they have as little friction in their in their user experience as possible.
See, I thought, Wesley, when you were going to go down the VIP path, I thought we were going to be referring to like what you might call a super user or just a different persona. And I used to use the example because this used to crop up all the time in ITIL training. People about, why should the boss get special treatment just because they call, and they're the boss and whatever. Now, what you've said is valid. I mean, I'd say things like, this person's time is more valuable, is really valuable, right? They're, we got to make sure that they're well served. But why aren't we defining this in advance instead of it happening on the fly and causing tension? Because in some instances, on the right day of the month, at the end of the month, when you want to get those last few invoices out, that person working in the accounts receivable department printing invoices is the most important person in the organization today.
Sure.
She has got to get those invoices out before the post gets collected or whatever. I mean, this is the olden days, right before. So, that's to me was a good example of a VIP. And that would trigger a discussion of, okay, so it isn't one size fits all service. That's too simplistic. We've got to think about not just the urgency, but the impact of incidents and the impact of that person on that day of the month. And it's not even people and roles and activities. It even comes down to days of the month and times of the day. So one size fits all becomes really, really difficult. And in fact, the whole idea of SLAs, which we used to spend so much time talking about, to me is so passé now because we found so many flaws in these formulas and in this logic that it just becomes, what? Customer experience is what people are talking about now, right? XLAs. And it's a little bit more sophisticated. And I'm not an expert in that. You have to speak to Alan Nance, one of my buddies, and he'll tell you exactly how XLAs work. But we've moved on from the olden days of one size fits all with the odd little exception written into an SLA for that group.
Yeah, yeah. No, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. I agree with that, in fact. And, I love the fact that you talked about, that persona in accounting and making sure that everyone's paid on time, right? That person most definitely becomes a VIP. And when you stepped into that example, I said, "Oh, here we go. We're moving into experience, right? Because when you take an experience lens, you're looking at these various experiences by these various personas. At any point, someone's experience may become part of the critical chain to deliver on greater experiences for the entire company. So I love that.
Mm. And Dave, so do I actually, because where I was coming from VIP is the traditional, as I said, the C-suite, and I fundamentally have issue with them receiving different treatment. And I get Wes's point of view that you are important and special, but I think that they should experience the same experience for what they are, after all, have created themselves, is a C-suite. And if it's a poor experience, that they should actually experience. So that's my point of view. But Dave, I just wanted, because it leads on to the next question. Oh, sorry, Gomez, please. Yeah.
Oh, just really briefly, I would say that uh, I even those personas, the executive personas, are not immune to experiencing the universal experience. What happens is that they just have an out button, so they can get off the train at any point. But they're in it.
Oh,
Trust
that's
me.
very
I have
true.
stories I could tell you some other time.
Well, that's true. I do assume that you do receive this great treatment, but perhaps you don't after all. Yeah. And Dave, going back to we talk about SLAs, and as you know, I wrote my master's on service level agreements and what I agree and don't agree with. But what I was saying earlier is I have issues somewhat in that why and is it the role of IT service management to create experience? And do users want a great experience?
Uh, I think we're ooh, see, if we were having this conversation years ago, I think I'd be giving completely different answers to this, because I think I've talked with you before about in my early days of teaching, I talk about from a customer service perspective, customers want the three R's from a service desk or a help desk. They want a response first. They want you to pick up the phone. They want a resolution, and they want a bit of respect in the process. You don't bark their head off for interrupting them, right? So, and I'm not sure. I think that's all. I wouldn't say passe. I wouldn't say it's not relevant anymore. But we've moved on a heck of a long way since those days of support, and I'm not really sure that it's easy to talk in terms that an old dinosaur like me talks about and the analogies I give in today's world anymore. I mean, I know we still have service desks, of course, but the way they operate now, the urgency around everything, the speed in which decisions have to be made, the tools that we're using, it's really quite a different environment. But the lessons we learned from those first few baby steps still stand us in good stead. You still got to treat people respectfully. They still need a resolution. And you know what? If you don't respond to them when they cry for help, then it doesn't matter how well you eventually solve their problem and apologize. You're in the bad books. So I'm not sure what you're looking for here, Katrina, when you talk about customer experience, but the evolution of that and how it's now changed. SLAs, I'm not really sure have a much of a place. They always were a performance focus. And by the way, when we started with ITSM, it was really infrastructure management, not service management. ITIM, not ITSM. It was a little time, 2 or 3 years before the ITSMF was originally called the ITIMF. Uh, so, but that experience is where we came from and allowed us to build knowledge and awareness and learn as we went. And that part of that learning is where we're at today, where you're a little bit impatient because there's still a few people like me around talking about service level agreements, and they're not quite so important anymore.
I guess where I'm coming from is sometimes, and especially from a human-centered design lens, excuse me, users just want the system to function. It doesn't have to be a delightful experience. And I question why we're investing a lot of money on this, because I think the investment, Dave, should be made on what's broken in IT service management, such as I say it all the time, fixing your CMDB up, fixing your mapping to your services, these fundamental things that are still broken. Sorry. Excuse me, I got a frog in my throat. That are still broken in IT service management. That's where I think the investment and focus should be. And that's just my personal opinion, and I respect, of course, everybody in our industry, but that's my thoughts. Yeah.
I think some of our users are a bit more sophisticated than they used to be, and they're not. It's not so much fixing things that are broken. It's doing a bit more for me today than you were doing yesterday. And what I mean by that is, and I don't mean this to sound too flippant or rude, but if you think about if you work in an organization and you see things that are inefficient or that could be improved with a little bit of thought and effort, why can't somebody work on this? If you're working in if you're in a sales role in an organization, but the information and the tools you're being given are not as good or not as effective or helpful as the tools that your competitors are using. That's what I mean by being a bit more respectful of the user, is not just fixing their broken stuff quickly, but giving them the tools they need.
Or I would argue, stop it being broken in the first place.
Well, it doesn't have to be broken, it just has to be old, and just has to be something which could be more helpful, right? I'm talking about applications here. So we're talking about services as applications.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, Kat, you mentioned that um, the words investment. And I think it'd be remiss not to spend a little more time on that in the sense that IT people have, for eons, not been great at making the case for investments in the areas where they are needed to provide a better experience because they've not been talking about the user experience. They've not actually embedded their request for investment in terms of the experiences they're trying to enrich. And as a result, it seems like a request to just make get increase the coffers of your IT budget um, that are not aligned with the business's strategic objectives. So when somebody goes up and says, "This year I want to invest X in this brand new CMDB," but you cannot express how it's going to improve the user experience, you don't deserve a dime. You don't. You don't deserve a dime. But if you can express the case, the business case, in terms of enriching the user experience and actually improving the delivery of the business services, now you have my attention.
Do you know what the way I encourage people, and thanks for bringing that up, Wesley. That's a good example. Is the way I explain this is you have a TV show called Dragon's Den? Well, the Dragon's Den of IT in the US it's called Shark Tank, Wesley, right? But everywhere else in the world it's called Dragon's Den. But you guys have to. That's not good enough for you guys. You have to call it Shark Tank.
It's
Anyway,
it's Shark
the
Tank in
the,
Australia.
the IT the IT manager, yeah, the guys in IT, when you've got an idea for, you're talking about an idea for a new application, a new service, you've got to run the gauntlet of the Dragon's Den in for IT, which is basically three people: the CEO, who wants to know how this is going to benefit the business; the CFO, who wants to know how much is it going to cost, or how much more money are we going to make; and then the CIO, who says how much work is this going to be, and how what resources you're going to need, or whatever. You got to tick all those three boxes to get those people to put the money down and say, "Go ahead, do this." That's one thing. I always say to people, when my boss doesn't listen to me when I got good ideas. Well, is it really such a good idea? You think it's a good idea, but have you run the gauntlet of the Dragon's Den in your mind? Have you actually thought about those three people and what they want from you, and as an IT leader? And that's one thing. The other thing I mentioned on this subject, which I know is a little bit, might sound a little bit silly, but it's not. This is a deadly serious subject. You ever get asked to do more with less? Of course you do. I hear this all the time. Oh, my boss wants me to do more, but my budget's been cut. And that's so sad and so unfair. Really? Have you ever looked at how the world works? Everything that you buy today is better than the version you bought 3 years ago. Think of TVs, think of iPhones, think of laptops, think of cars. And in real terms, they're all cheaper. How is this done? It's done by people figuring out ways to do things that cost less but end up being better. Now, I know that doesn't apply to every single thing in the world, but it certainly does apply to a lot of things. And just by saying, I need more money, well, where are you cutting costs? Where are you able to save? You know, my phone bills are going down and down and down over the years. I mean, I know that might be a sore point for some people because you think your phone bill's high. But I used to travel the world 20 years ago and I'd spend thousands of dollars a month on phone calls. I can't spend that amount anymore. We're online. We're making calls like this and it's virtually free, right? So there are ways that you can save money and there are ways that you can do things faster and quicker and better. And they don't always involve spending more money.
I
Um,
love that.
yeah, it's good.
I mean,
But
think about it. It's actually a mandate from the organization. It's a mandate coming from the organization to tell the technology organization, be innovative, be creative, which in effect is a call for them to embrace human centered design, Cat, don't you
Yeah,
think?
yeah,
absolutely. But Wesley, I'm interested when you were talking about the CMDB and explaining the benefit to the users. I respectfully again would challenge that, because I think where the benefit comes is from the IT professionals. And I think that's their experience is as important, I would argue, as a user experience, because having a functional CMDB helps everybody in IT. Um, so it's not just about, again, respectfully, the user experience, it's about the IT professional experience under the realm of humanizing IT.
Yeah, and that's fair. I think, unfortunately, IT has not been great at even arguing for the improvement of their own experience.
Correct. Yeah.
It's really kind of a sad state of affairs. Yeah.
Correct. So a great discussion and some debate there. But I just want to sort of finish that off with saying, when I'm talking about user experience, I just think, in my opinion, and under the humanizing IT, I think the experience has to be right. And when I say right, it means IT might not have the money, the maturity, or capability to create a great experience. So it has to be the right experience based on what you can afford and what you can deliver. And that's just to sort of talk about that experience piece. And I guess we're nearing the end. And as I said, this has been very, very interesting. And the last topic I want to talk about in the book is actually on page 30, where in the Humanizing IT, we actually distinguished between a customer and a user. And I know there's great debate around the world. Why should you call people users? It doesn't sound very user friendly. Um, but we've just decided in Humanizing IT to make it simple that a user is somebody in the business and a customer is a paying person. So if I use an airline, for example, a customer is a
well
passenger.
done.
Thank you. Simplicity. But what am going to say is that I don't believe that IT service management is responsible for customer experience. I think IT service management is only responsible for user experience. And why I say that is because very rarely, and Dave, back in the day when you were writing your processes, very rarely do IT people have any connection with a passenger or a customer. So how can we, when I hear CIOs in the C-suite saying we need to be more customer focused, how can we be customer focused in IT when we very rarely have any type of relationship with a customer? We are responsible for user experience. Wesley, do you agree with that?
Ah. And, I mean, there are certain parts of that make sense to me and that resonate. That said, though, um, I think we've been a bit myopic, honestly, in talking about customer experience, customer experience, customer experience. What it brings up for me is the need for us to talk about the human experience and the fact that when we look at the human experience, we could talk about the employee experience, the customer experience, the experience of people in the business and operations that are trying to deliver to those customers of the business. We could think about the community experience. So how's the community in which the organization is operating? How are they being served by the company or not? And what is IT's role in considering that as they're developing new and deploying new services and products to the business, right? Having some understanding of the broader context in which the business is in, I believe makes IT more responsive to the business itself. Even if at the end of the day, the folks who are not going to hold them, who are going to hold them accountable, are not the customers consuming from the business, but the operators in the business that are producing and delivering services to the customers.
Yeah,
Dave, your thoughts on my thoughts?
yeah. Wesley's right on the money here, and I was just thinking back to when I used to talk in sessions and in training about this subject of why do we care about the customer? It's the user who's our focus.
Mm,
I'd say where's the harm in actually proving your value to the business by thinking about what we do for customers and coming up with solutions and opportunities that nobody thought about because of your knowledge of IT and technology. And the one example I used to give, and it's going to sound really silly, but I remember walking down the street one time when I was teaching in Singapore, and I was out one afternoon. I walked down the street and there was a big billboard. And if you've ever been to Singapore, you know one of their attractions is the underwater world on Sentosa Island. And there was a big billboard that had pictures of fish on it, and it had buttons around the edges, almost like you were looking at a TV screen. And the caption said something about how come to underwater world and you get a little handheld device that you walk around, and through RFID technology you just point towards a fish or something in the tank and all this information came up. So instead of having little signs everywhere, this tank contains the so and so invisible fish that you couldn't see, right? You get this thing that you walk around and you get all of this information. And I used to say to students, I took a picture of this and I could send it to you, Kat, if you're interested, to prove that I'm not making this up. And I used to say, who came up with this idea? RFID 25 years ago, fairly new technology. It wasn't the guy managing the underwater world, the marine biologist. It was somebody in IT. Somebody somewhere said, we could do this. Now we use RFID to get in our hotel rooms, with the little key cards and our credit cards and everything. It's just omnipresent. But in those days, this was new stuff. And that provided an opportunity for them to boost their attendance, get more sales, etc. And I just like to think it was maybe an IT guy who came up with this idea and was thinking about the customer of this business.
And who
I
started
don't
on the
know.
and he started on the service desk and worked his way up. Yeah. And
Maybe,
yeah,
who knows? But
well, we could yeah, very nice story.
Yeah, I love that story, and what it makes me recall is the famous anecdote where President John F. Kennedy was visiting NASA headquarters in the '60s, and he saw a janitor carrying a broom, and he walks over to the man and says, "What are you doing?" The janitor responded, "Well, Mr. President, I'm helping to put a man on the moon."
yeah.
Right? So it in thinking about the overall business and the context you're operating in, you're giving every human being in an organization something invaluable.
Yeah.
You're giving them purpose,
Yeah.
and
And
that's critical.
as soon as the men got on the moon, somebody had to follow along and clean up behind them. I mean, for sure.
But I mean,
That's a good story, Wesley. That's a good one. Yeah.
it is, and as you know, Wes and David, that's actually in the book, and we talk about that story. And I say to IT professionals, the janitor didn't say he was sweeping the floor. He knew his purpose in the organization. So, I don't want IT people to say that I'm a developer or I work in infrastructure. Like, what are you doing? And change that language also. And I guess, Dave, in conclusion, of this fantastic discussion, like me, you've evolved over the last few years or so, and you're now approaching service management through a different lens. Let's hear about that, because I'm sure our listeners will be very keen to hear what's happened in the pink elephant world and how you're approaching IT service management.
Well, it's no secret to those who showed an interest, but for those of you who's passed you by, is we don't work with the ITIL model anymore. A couple of years ago, after lots and lots of discussions with the new owners of ITIL, PeopleCert, we just said to them, we don't support the vision you have, and we're going to go off and do something different, and that's what we did. And about a year ago, we launched a different ITSM model. It's got a lot of familiarity about it, but it's not a copycat. And we call it Integrated ITSM because one of the things we were frustrated about was the lack of acknowledgement of the integration between ITSM as we've always known it and a lot of enabling practices that make it work today. Stuff like agile and lean. And if you don't do anything after listening to me ramble on today, please look into lean. I think it's one of the most under acknowledged set of practices that we have access to today in IT. Lean IT organizational change management, etc. There's a whole bunch of practices that are outside of the traditional ITSM that we've got to make more mainstream. And so we talk about integrated ITSM along with making sure you understand what we just were talking about, what the business needs and opportunities are, and you're serving them well. And so we've partnered with our certification partner PDC, and we've developed a designation scheme for IT professionals, where you can become a professional or a champion in integrated ITSM. It's all on our website, and we're super excited. And everybody who's looked at it just says 2 thumbs up.
And I'm in that camp. I think it's fabulous what you and the Pink Elephant staff have done to IT service management and the integration of these other principles and frameworks. It is absolutely what is needed today, because as you said, it's changed from the 1970s since it was first written as that process-driven framework. And I'm sure I will see you before one way or another, but I will see you in person at Pink 25, and I'm very, very proud and honoured that Wesley and I are actually going to be facilitating a masterclass. We are beyond excited. Yeah.
But I think it must have been something to do with you as to why we are at record attendance signups already.
Oh, wow.
Those of you who might have attended a Pink event before would know that we advertise a year in advance. In the conference, Pink 25 is the first week in February. There's already over 250 people signed up and committed. And that's more than we've ever had at this point in the year. So it's telling you that the program we have of all of these integrated ITSM enabling practices, which includes AI, by the way. I hosted a webinar just today about AI with some of my best buddies, and that's gaining a lot of attention, as well as the human side of things with what you do and organizational change management generally. It's really resonating with ITSM folks, and we're so proud and pleased that people put their faith in us every year. So we'd love to see you. Again, that's on our website.
Yeah, absolutely, everybody. And as I said, let's go to Pink 25 and make it bigger than Elvis. It's always an amazing event that
Good.
you put on. And Wesley, I will see you in our next Humanising IT podcast. And thank you for your time. And that's it, guys. And
Absolutely.
let's humanize
Absolutely.
IT. Thank you.
Thanks. All right.